Um, Thank you, JNU academics. Am I audible?
I think you just turned it off. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, JNU academics. This is a very fantastic moment to discuss Professor Gupta's work. I mean, I should use the word evra, but it is not really possible for at least me to discuss all that is written. Some of the things that he's written, they challenge our fundamental understanding about Indian society. I teach research methodology, and for a very long time, my head literally spin around while teaching about phenomenology. And I stumble upon his little piece on caste today. It talks about phenomenological approach. And that basically helped me understand what phenomenology is. And that's where first time you encounter his theorization of discrete castes. There are interesting what discrete castes are, and uses that in plural, not in singular. It is basically, he's taking on Dumo. Dumo's eponymous text, Homo Hierarchicus, which is basically riled up a lot of Indian sociologists. And he is one of them, but he expresses riling up through his writing. Professor Bete, reacted very sharply, saying that I'm a child of modernity and not shreds of patches. It's a long quote, but it's very interesting nevertheless. Because we don't believe in this Brahminical hierarchy. That is what it means. What is this Brahminical hierarchy? I mean, that Dumo talks about is that, he talks about hierarchy and he privileges Brahmins, which is based on basically textual understanding of Dumo. And Dumo basically famously that Indian sociology is basically at the confluence of Indology and sociology. So basically that book is based on his field work and his vast reading of classical Indian texts, the scriptures. And then on the base of that, he says that, Indian society is based on hierarchy, caste hierarchy. He also virtuously wrote a book in the context of Western society, which he called, basically arguing, saying that European society is based on equality. And Indian society is based on hierarchy. That was another kind of, perhaps, reason for Professor Bete to be angry. So, now, what is Dumo saying? He's saying that, look, Brahmins are privileged and lower caste basically reciprocate to what Brahmins say, what Brahmins believe. And that is, based on that understanding, stands Indian society. That is basically, to put it very simply, Homo Hierarchicus is all about. I think what is problematic here is that the principle of reciprocity. That Indians do not really have any problem with what Brahmins say. Okay, so, because lower caste people say that, oh, fine, we basically, accept your ritualist position and your knowledge based on scriptures. What, Robert Redford said that, it's a great tradition. So therefore it is for Dumo that, this hierarchy or Brahminical understanding of hierarchy, Brahmins basically are encompassing. They have encompassed this society. And others don't have any problem. So obviously this is the kind of transformation that Indian society has had over the last 60, 70 years would not be palatable. And that is what exactly Professor Gupta has come out with, this idea, this theory of discrete castes. So every caste would have its own stories to share, to tell, that how they don't really believe in what Brahmins say, what Brahminical hierarchy is all about. So they go on talking about their own stories. They also devalue Brahmins. Some say that we're just like Brahmins, but because of some historical accidents, we were reduced to be, untouchables. I would not go into those details, but this is the gist, that how lower caste people basically present their stories and, try to basically say that we are not very different from Brahmins. And this is what is this theory of difference. Another philosophical term that Professor Gupta is writing makes us very easy for us to understand. First, phenomenology, by talking about that how these castes look at each other, and of course vis-a-vis Brahmins, and therefore they don't really buy this argument, what Dumo basically talks about. So Brahmins is not the only being which is basically pure. So there is this dichotomous relationship between pure and impure. So Brahmins are pure, twice borns are pure. Brahmins would not even accept that other two twice born castes are also as poor as they are, pure as they are. Recently there is this Gyanpith awardee saint, who even says that only certain Brahmins are pure. Ram Bhadracharya, and others are impure. Brahmins, we're not talking about, forget about Dalits or OBCs. So the twice born also for certain Brahmins are not as pure as Brahmins are. So forget about where they place Dalits or OBCs or women. So this is what, and this is what Professor Gupta has interrogated by calling discrete castes. So these castes don't really accept Brahminical supremacy, the whole idea about purity and impurity. And the stories that these caste, non-Brahmin, I would use the term non-Brahmin caste, offer about their own existent conditions, that is all about discrete caste. So this is one very important contribution that Professor Gupta has made to the corpus of Indian sociology. Of course, he is also carrying forward the legacy that has been solidly established by M.N. Srinivas and Bethe. But I would say that the discrete caste theories is something which basically sets him apart from these two doyens of Indian sociology, Bethe and Srinivas. Srinivas began talking about change. Indian society basically fluctuates between, or rather exists between, change and continuity. Some people would talk about reproducing continuity through their work, reproduction of continuity. Some would talk about change. And Srinivas, Bethe, and notably Professor Gupta belong to the change school of thought. They talk about change. Now, when you are trying to problematize this Brahminical understanding of hierarchy, single hierarchy, continuous hierarchy, he uses the term continuous hierarchies. And the kind of claim that lower castes have by talking about these interesting stories, my question would be to Professor Gupta as to, do these stories really help them change their structural position? Or simply it is their psychologism? These stories basically, do they find concrete examples or application in the society to which they belong, or they also continue to reproduce some kind of Brahminical hierarchy? Of course, he's saying that even caste is no longer hierarchical. Caste is also being solidly used in politics as identity. Caste has solidly emerged as an identity. And that identity basically helps communities, castes, to, flex their muscles in the arena of politics. He doesn't denounce caste. he doesn't really say that whether caste is going to be annihilated. He's not taking that position. Correct me, sir, if I'm wrong. So caste, some way or the other, by quoting Michael Moffat, he's also saying that because lower caste have also internalized the logic of caste. So they also practice some kind of distinction, if not discrimination, between themselves. So caste is not going to be annihilated. This is Ambedkarian project. But then, I mean, if you are going to annihilate the text, scriptures, because they are the basically repositories of these kind of practices. So therefore, Indology is a very, very important, perhaps, discipline. Because it tells us, it shows the mirror of this society as to how it is. Now, prominent sociologists also talked about, these texts, the scriptures are sociological in nature. Gure was one of the strongest proponents. Another was D.P. Mukherjee. But do these scriptures really reflect a caste, reflect our society? That is something which I think we have to ponder over. Another question that I'd like to ask him, that sociologists really haven't looked at the corpus of Indian society or Indian sociology from above, meaning from Brahminical point of view. We criticize Brahminism or Brahmins, but have we interrogated the ritualist tradition or position of Brahmins that they continue to reproduce? And that's where the legitimacy of caste comes about. I mean, when castes are discrete, he's basically saying that, look, this doesn't really make any sense. And then he goes one step further by saying that we should all of us are citizens. We should treat each other as citizens. But is it very easy for us to believe in that kind of citizenship? Where does citizenship come from? Where does that claim come from? We have certain state gives us certain privileges. So when socially speaking, certain individuals are privileged, twice born. And then state comes into the picture and tries to bring about certain underprivileged citizens to be on par with twice born citizens. So the kind of rights that the Constitution gives us, should we forfeit these rights? Should we give up these rights in order to be called citizens? Because this is one of the conditions that Professor Gupta puts forth. The privileges that we have accrued. So what to do with these privileges? By letting go of these privileges, are going to be citizens, all of us? Because we have to accept, and he may not agree with me, we have to accept this fact that there are certain citizens which continue to be underprivileged. There are certain citizens who are more citizens. There are certain who are less citizens. Can we basically integrate the notion of citizenship in these terms? That would be my another question to Professor Gupta. I spoke about change and how change is important, and how Indian society has come out of the ache of Brahminism, and therefore there is change. People are, we are not saying people or individuals are changing. When it comes to talking about Indian society, we basically talk about these collectivities, which is in the context of Indian society, caste. So when we say change is happening, are caste changing? Do caste collectively change or only individual change? If they collectively change, then the enterprise of sociology makes a lot of sense. And if there are individuals who are changing, certain individuals from certain castes, does it mean that castes are changing? That would be my another question to Professor Gupta. A lot of this, what he talks about, falls in the realm of, I'm not sure whether you would like this label, postmodernism. And I find him very close to Clifford Geertz. I mean, he's very authoritatively and quite very influentially used phenomenology. But he uses phenomenology after going to the field, after hearing the stories of of those people, of those non-Brahmins, that tell him stories about how they do not really attach importance to Brahminical hierarchy, because they are as good as them, because they have these interesting stories to offer. Gates also does that. So interpretivism, somebody pointed out interpretivism. So I think Professor Gupta also gives us those kind of signs, that he also attaches a great deal of importance to interpretivism. But then if it is interpretivism, then whose interpretation should matter? Professor Gupta's, because he is a very influential sociologist. Does that interpretation actually have any correspondence on the ground, or simply it is, these stories that where people tell you the word I used some time back, psychologism? Do these stories have reflections on the ground? Do these stories have basically, is there any example? I can give you one example. But Nadars used to be untouchables. Do I have time? 1 minute, okay. Nadar, but they have crossed over the line of untouchability, and now they are no longer considered Nadars, untouchables. Except this one example, I don't really see there is any structural change in Indian society. That caste that claim to be as pure as Brahminical, but they are treated as Brahminical, as pure by their fellow, perhaps citizens or counterparts from some other castes. I think these are some of the questions that I would like to ask Professor Gupta, and if we get a chance to speak, I'd like to elaborate more on certain issues, because of paucity of time I can't really take you guys for granted, so I think I should stop. Thank you.